so much for your kind and thoughtful words and for providing us this valuable insight to the future. And now, I'd like us all, please join me in thanking our speakers today, Nick Percoco and Aviva Litan, the trendsetters for this session. Giving you some ideas. I think if we boil it down, I think the machines are getting smarter, so we have to be just as smart if we want to face the future ahead. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite the next chairperson to bring us into the next session, which is going to be a fantastic session, learning about some of the biggest challenges in the few years ahead.
Hi, everybody. I think this is the wrong presentation. Anyway, our next session is going to be about Sony. What can we learn from Sony? And it's divided into two separate sessions. The first one, we're going to have a speak by one of our distinguished guests here, Bruce Schneier, which I'll introduce in a second. And after that, we're going to convene in a panel here on the side. So actually, I did some research about Bruce, and I have 3 pages of information about him. But I met him outside, and he said, "You can't use that." So I said, "What do you mean I can't use that? I can't talk about the books you wrote?" He said, "No, you can't. I can't talk about Cryptogram, your monthly newsletter?" He said, "No, you can't. I can't talk about the fact that you're 7 feet tall?" I said, "No, you can't. So I'm not going to say all that." So I said, "What can I tell about you?" And he said, "Just say why you wanted me here." So Bruce, we wanted you here because you're a thought leader in cyber, and we'd love to have you here and share your thoughts with us about Sony. Thank you very much, Bruce Schneier.
Hey there, good afternoon.
Let's start moving off this stuff. So I want to talk about cyber attack in the 21st century, and I want to start by talking about Sony. Because I think the Sony attack of late last year really illustrates a lot of the problems and challenges with cyber attack moving forward. So you all know the Sony story, but I want to actually give the timeline because I think it's really interesting. So 2 preludes. First, in the fall of 2010, there were 2 NSA codenamed operations to penetrate North Korea, including what they call a fourth-party attack. And I will describe this. South Korea was eavesdropping on North Korea, and the United States was eavesdropping on South Korea, eavesdropping on North Korea. Right? That's pretty cool. And then the NSA documents, they're like really impressed at that. And it is neat, you can't argue. The other prelude, June of last year, there actually was a threat by North Korea to Sony if it released the movie The Interview. And we saw this in the released documents that the president of Sony consulted the US government, and was told basically North Korea is full of MP threats, don't worry about it. Sony concluded, and this is incredible as I say it, that there was some risk. So what they would do is release the movie anyway, but take their name off the credits. Like that would fool somebody. And there is this conversation we saw in the leaked emails between the Sony co-chair Amy Pascal and Seth Rogen, the director of the movie, about changing the assassination scene to just kind of appease the North Koreans. So the attack started in September of 2014. This was, we believe, a phishing attack against someone within the company. Some kind of zero-day exploit was involved. The details are not public because of all of the lawsuits that are going on. There are some forensics teams still in Sony looking at what's happening, but we're not seeing a lot of that public. I think that will become public in the next few years. We have to wait for the lawsuits to work their way through the system. And the attack was undetected by Sony. The attackers quickly obtained administrator credentials, and they spent a lot of time in the network, mapping the Sony system, downloading files. There was one, I actually don't know how much was taken. The hacker brag was 100 terabytes of information. A few terabytes were released, so we don't actually know. But they spent a lot of time downloading files, planning their attack, very careful and very patient. The public attack began on November 24th, and this was, in the morning, the destruction of the hard drives and servers, both done to destroy data and for the attackers to cover their tracks. And here's where the attackers made their first mistake. When they started deleting data off the computers, a picture of a skull and crossbones appeared. So here's a little tip for you. If you're going to erase someone's data, put the scary picture on after you're finished. Because any smart user immediately yanked the plug, and thereby saving a lot of data. Also, there were some people who weren't at work, didn't turn their computer on. But a lot of data. Sony lost a lot of data. I guess, fortunately, the hackers had a backup. Unfortunately, they published it. On that same day, November 24th, there was a Reddit post attributing the attack to the Guardians of Peace. This is an organization that nobody had ever heard of. The initials, of course, were the same as a major U.S. political party. There was no connection, but that confused people for a while. No motive was given. In the initial announcement, they just said, "This is us." They didn't say anything about anything. And within the United States government, work on attribution began immediately. And both from their extensive firewalling in the United States, a couple of weeks ago we learned about that. All of the detection systems they have around the United States, their forensics evidence, and whatever they have from their implants around the world. November 26th, this is the first publication. 4 previously unreleased movies show up on BitTorrent. This is the first inkling that this attack is about more than deleting data. Again, no linking to North Korea, to the movie. The first time in public someone talked about the possibility that North Korea was behind this was on December 1st. And that was a link between the attack and the movie. It was made by a U.S. news organization, NBC News. So nothing from the attackers. December 1st, we saw the first major leak of Sony data. 26 gigabytes, including employee data, executive salaries, and we're starting to see news reports. So about these attacks, that the attackers very much curated the data they were releasing. They released it over the course of several days and weeks, and trying to put interesting details out there that are embarrass Sony. That executive salaries are embarrassing, especially if you pay your women less than your men, and that was news. December 3rd, a second major link, including security search, passwords, payment information, accounting information. Another security tip, do not put your passwords in a clear text file marked passwords. You just look dumb. December 7th, budgets, financial reports, banking statements, license agreements, employee contracts. Again, information about what Sony was paying in stars, and we had another gender gap. So a lot more details that the news media liked. December 8th was the email leak. And you remember the stories of the emails by the Sony executives insulting their stars, insulting the U.S. president. Also on December 8th, we had the first message from the Guardians of Peace linking the attacks to the movie. This is 1 week after the media did it, and lots of speculation. And I'll read the quote: "Stop immediately showing the movie of terrorism which can break the regional peace and cause the war." Okay, so, not great grammar, not native English speakers. The next day, the United States Director, FBI Cyber Division, says there's no attribution to North Korea at this point, dampening down speculation. December 10th, 13th, 14th, 16th, more leaks of data. Also on December 16th, we had what was believed to be an explicit terrorist threat about the movie. The quote, "Remember the 11th of September 2001. Not really explicit, but at this point we had movie theaters not wanting to show the movie. And actually afraid that there would be something. December 19th, 3 weeks after the initial public attack, we finally have something out of the FBI. I'm going to read the quote. "As a result of our investigation and in close collaboration with other U.S. government departments and agencies, the FBI now has enough information to conclude that the North Korean government is responsible for these actions." Right, so the FBI says North Korea. President Obama also makes a statement, and he talks about, what does he say? We cannot have a society in which some dictator someplace can start imposing censorship here in the United States. And the security community basically doesn't believe him. There's widespread distrust. There was some evidence in the FBI statement. There were similarities to a 2013 attack attributed to North Korea. There were similarities in the networks used. All of this is fakeable. Right? If you remember what I read about the FBI statement, he alluded to other U.S. government departments and agencies, most likely the NSA, so there's some secret evidence involved. And we don't know what that is. Right? Did the NSA actually see the attack happening? Did they see the planning? I mean, they might have recorded phone calls discussing the plan. You know, in my fantasies, they actually had a copy of Kim Jong-un's sign-off on the memo, right, saying, let's do this. No, we didn't know then, we know now that the intelligence was partially based on a human source inside the North Korean government. Anyway, at the time, there were many skeptics. Mark Rogers of Cloudflare posted some really well-thought-out, well-written rebuttals. I wrote skeptical essays. I mean, a lot of reasons why we didn't think it was North Korea. One, it didn't make sense. Why would North Korea do this over a movie? Right? Sony had a vested interest in it being North Korea. You think about all of their lawsuits, that there's a force majeure clause. They can claim that this is an act of war, an act of a foreign power. Suddenly they're saving themselves a lot of liability. Alternative theories, there were lots of them. The most primary one was hackers. That's what most of us believed. I mean, Sony's been a company everyone's loved to hate since 2005. And the last time this kind of thing happened was in 2010. The target was a U.S. company called HP Gary Federal, and the perpetrator were the hackers LulzSec. Right? So the previous time this happened, it was hackers. Someone did a linguistic analysis of the Guardians of Peace messages, and they implied a Russian speaker. There was a disgruntled insiders theory. Some people thought it was unaffiliated North Korean nationals. We see a lot of that. I call them cyber militias. You see a lot of that out of China, out of Russia. You're not people within the government, but other people trying to help. The Syrian Electronic Army is an example of that. December 22nd, 23rd, North Korea was the victim of a DDoS attack. Some people thought this was the United States. The United States immediately said this isn't us. We don't know what happened. Certainly North Korea's links to the internet are tenuous under the best of days, so it certainly could have been natural. January 2nd, though, is when the administration did impose sanctions on North Korea in response to this attack. Actually don't know what that means. North Korea is already the most heavily sanctioned nation on the planet. There actually isn't a lot left to do to them, but we did something. January 7th, so a few weeks later, a few weeks after the FBI announcement, the FBI Director James Comey is at an event in New York. He's at Fordham University. And he talks more about the attack. He gives more evidence. He talks about how the attackers got sloppy and didn't do well hiding their tracks. He says a couple other things. Again, the skeptics are not convinced. Mark Rogers writes another blog post. I write something else. It's just implausible that North Korea did it. I mean, fast forward to end of January, what really convinced me finally was a New York Times article by David Sanger. It was actually in country, I don't know if he's in the room, where he really talked about the progression of what happened within the administration to identify the North Koreans and the process. Forensic investigation continues to this day, lawsuits continue to this day. I have seen estimates of costs of $100 million to Sony. The February 2015 earnings statement, they said the cost so far was $15 million. I don't believe that for a minute. Honestly, I can't count that low. The cost is actually much higher. All right, so why is this interesting? This really encapsulates many of the themes and surprises of cyber conflict. The cyber war rhetoric, I think, is really interesting to watch, and it's very scary. We had a lot of hyperbole in the United States about how this is cyber war and we need to go to war over this. And that very much skewed debate. But the target is interesting. It's not critical infrastructure. I mean, who would have imagined that the first major attack against the United States by a foreign country targets a movie company? It wasn't even on my top 50 list. And the objective isn't theft. It's destruction. It's coercion. So it's very different. And really, we're all vulnerable to this sort of thing. I always think of attackers along two axes, skill and focus. Right? Your low-skill, low-focus attackers are what we're used to. The script kiddies, the opportunists, the kind of attacks we see all the time, kind of the background radiation of the internet. High-skill, low-focus, those are your identity theft attacks, zero-day exploits, the fancier ones, the better ones. Low skill, high focus is traditional targeted attacks. High skill, high focus is APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. That's a buzzword we've been hearing recently. And the difference is absolute versus relative security. If you think of a low focus attack, the Target Corporation of last year, the attackers just wanted a big block of credit card numbers. They didn't care where they got them. And if Target security was better than the next retailer, Target would have been fine. But against a high-focus attack, the attacker wants you. And we know, on the internet, the attacker has the advantage. Against a sufficiently funded, motivated, skilled attacker, they will not fail to get in, period. So really, how do we deal with this? On the other hand, Sony had some really bad security. Some of the documents leaked showed some extraordinarily bad security out of Sony. They really didn't have good measures in place. And they had very bad response. Very quickly you saw the response by the executives shift from we are responding as Sony to we are responding as individuals scared for our careers. So interesting to see that transition because there wasn't a coherent response plan. And they had no real way to figure out what to do or even what happened because the network was so badly destroyed. There's an interesting democratization of tactics. The cyber war rhetoric says we're fighting a cyber war, but that's not true. What's really happening is we're increasingly seeing warlike tactics used in broader cyber conflicts. Technology spreads capability. And while you used to be able to determine by the attacker by the weaponry, right, if in the real world we walked outside and saw a tank, we would know the military was involved, or some military, because only militaries have tanks. That doesn't work in cyberspace. Everyone uses the same tactics, same techniques, the same tools. It's amazing, but we are actually having a legitimate debate about whether a cyber attack was the result of a foreign power with a $20 billion military budget or two guys in a basement somewhere. Right? That is a reasonable topic of discussion. That's not ridiculous. Recently, late last year, the hacker group Anonymous offered to take out ISIS for us. Now, good for them, but what? How is that even a plausible thing to say? Or in 2010, another arm of Anonymous warned NATO not to mess with it. Like regular people don't get to warn NATO. That's not the way the world's supposed to work. But in cyberspace, we are having this blending of nation-state and non-nation-state actors. And more of this politically motivated cyber attack. And politics is very broad here against nationalistic, ethical, religious, against corporations, governments, institutions, individuals. And this means attack attribution is hard. Right? I will compare two local incidents. In 2006, Israel attacked a nuclear power plant in Syria, did it with planes and bombs. The thing about an attack is the Syrians could look up, see the planes, and know who did it. 2010, US and Israel attacked Iran with a cyber weapon, with Stuxnet. Unless one of you guys called up Iran didn't know who did it. And that's very different. It's difficult to attribute attacks on the internet. Packets don't come with return addresses. It's easier to hop through other places. You don't have this same geography that you have in the real world. And when we manage to attribute attacks, it can take weeks. It took 3 weeks before the US was able to announce that North Korea attacked Sony. Right? You want to get this right because there are huge problems with potential misattribution. So we've had this arms race going on between attribution and deception. How do we figure out who did it? How do we hide who did it? 2012, the U.S. Secretary of Defense said in public, he said, the U.S. has made significant advances in identifying the origins of cyber attacks. And we don't know what that means. We don't know if the NSA has some new technology. Kind of doubt it. More likely that their espionage is so good that they're monitoring the planning processes. And strong attribution leads to deterrence. In the past year and a half, the United States has been far more aggressive in saying, we know who did it. Right? We indicted 5 Chinese nationals in absentia last year for hacking U.S. corporations. The Office of Management and Budget attack of 2 weeks ago, we very quickly blamed it on China. The attacks on the White House earlier this year, we quickly blamed on Russia. Right? Stuxnet, as soon as we were able to know when we said it, we are saying it a lot more. And I think what we're doing, I think what the United States is doing here, is saying to the world, we are good at attribution, don't try anything. But providing evidence is tricky. I mean, what happens if you announce North Korea did it and nobody believes you? A lot of reasons for this in the United States. I mean, there's broad mistrust of the national security community. Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. There's a lot of history of the evidence not really being there. And the evidence that was given was sloppy. And there are several levels of attribution. Right? There's the easiest, I know you did it. There's a little harder, I know you did it, and it can convince you I know you did it. There's the even harder, I know you did it, and it can convince the world I know you did it. With the Sony case, we did 1, maybe we did 2, we failed terribly at 3. And the reason we failed terribly is so much of the evidence was secret. Right? It was based on NSA surveillance. So this problem now becomes really bad. Because if a government wants to convince the world of the legitimacy of its retaliatory action, it's going to need to provide evidence. And to the extent that that evidence is based on secret sources and methods, that's going to become difficult. What this all means is that it's really hard to figure out who's in charge of defense. So Scott Charney at Microsoft first said this, and I think it's a really profound point. And what he said is that when you're attacked, there are a variety of institutions you can call to defend yourself. I'm going to use the United States as an example here. You can call them the police. You can call them the military. You can call them the Department of Homeland Security. You can call on some commercial products and services, or your corporate lawyers. And what matters is that the legal framework in which your defense operates depends on 2 things. Who's attacking you and why. And when you're attacked in cyberspace, the exact 2 things you don't know are who's attacking you and why. And you might know for a while. 3 weeks in the Sony case. Right? A couple of days in the OPM case. Right? Dooku attributed to Israel. Probably a little less than a year to figure that out. The Anthem attack in the United States attributed to China took a few weeks. So the question really is, whose job is it to defend Sony? If it's hackers, you can argue it's the police. If it's North Korea, you can argue it's the militaries. But the real question is, whose job is it to defend Sony before you know whose job is it to defend Sony? Or to put it another way, what is the default legal framework in which your defense operates? It depends a lot on country. In the United States, the NSA wants to be the default. I personally think a law enforcement default is better. There are countries where police and military are more integrated, where that's not going to be that much of a distinction. And in a lot of cases, it's really Sony's job to defend Sony. That Sony actually has to defend itself without attribution. And this gets really weird. In the media, as soon as the Sony attack happened, the big question was, who did it? Within the Sony incident response team, the one question they probably didn't care at all about is who did it. Because it doesn't matter for them. You have to just figure out how to recover, how to get back to security, how to defend. Right? So we need fast, flexible incident response without attribution. And that's difficult. I didn't do that. And there's this blurring between attack and espionage. And so again, I'll use the United States. The term for espionage is CNE, computer network exploitation. The term for attack is CNA, computer network attack. CNE is the job of the NSA. and it's under a set of legal rules. CNA is a separate branch of the government, branch of the military, U.S. Cyber Command. Completely separate set of rules. So from a policy perspective, these two are very far apart. Technically, though, they're very close, which is why in the United States, both CNE and CNA, both the NSA and the U.S. Cyber Command, are headed by the same general. Used to be Keith Alexander, who I believe was speaking here. Now it's Admiral Rogers. Right? And they're in the same buildings at Fort Meade. Because as a techie, you know that in either of these things, there are an enormous number of steps. Think of Sony, of getting in, of reconnaissance, of getting privileges, doing all that work. And that's all the same except the very last step, which is either copy star.star or delete star.star. And as a defender, you have no idea what's going to happen until that very last step. This also makes defense difficult. This is why you're seeing some policy proposals to treat espionage as an attack. Because from the victim's perspective, it basically is an attack. Now there are three basic types of attackers when you're talking about governments here. I think it's important to distinguish them. There's what I've been calling APT. And that are the major governments of the world with cyber attack capabilities. I think of US, UK, China, Russia, Israel, some other European countries, maybe down to India, Pakistan, some of the BRIC countries. And under that, you have customers that buy cyber weapons off the shelf from cyber weapons arms manufacturers. So we know something about those companies, and there you have the governments of Ethiopia and Azerbaijan and Syria and Saudi Arabia. They're buying off-the-shelf components. Then under that, you have the cyber militias, which are basically people either working for the government or just tolerated by the government who are using hacker tools. And a lot of stuff Syria does is just based on normal criminal hacker tools. They're just repurposing them. You might have more than one operating in tandem. I mean, China does APT and also has a cyber militia. And then below that, you have all of the non-nation state actors, ranging from criminals to nationalistic, this kind of politically motivated hacking, doing things for a variety of reasons, sometimes writing their own tools, most often using tools that are out there. So this is where we are in the 21st century. My fear is that we're in the early years of a cyber war arms race. That we're seeing a large buildup of cyber attack capabilities by a variety of countries. And like the previous arms race, there's not a lot of defense. That attack is easier than defense. There's a phrase I hear in the United States way too often that the best defense is a good offense. It's actually not true. The best defense is a good defense. But in cyberspace, good defense is hard. And we have to start paying attention to what defense looks like. Because as these offensive things happen, we are increasingly going to be in the blast radius. When North Korea gets mad, it attacks a movie company. When the United States has attacked the Brazilian oil company. Iran attacked the Saudi oil company. Right? Stuxnet had collateral damage outside the intended target. Early this year, China attacked GitHub. We're seeing more nation-state attacks against non-nation states. And that's going to be real interesting to watch in the future as countries realize that they'll get their sort of best bang for their cyber attack buck by going after a softer target. And instead of going after a government target, to pick one that's easier. Even the attack against the Office of Personnel Management was interesting. This was an attack against, yes, it was a government target, but it was a very civilian government agency. It was not a military target. So that's what I have. I believe there's going to be a panel right now, so I'm going to go up there and sit there until something else happens. Thank you.